In 1965, a country was forced out of its own union. Kicked out, not by choice. It had no natural resources, no army, barely enough drinking water, most of which it had to import from the very neighbor that just cut it loose. 60 years later, that country has a higher income per person than the United States, than Germany, than almost anywhere else on Earth. This is the story of how Singapore got rich. And it wasn't luck. On August 9th, 1965, Singapore's Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew, sat down in front of the cameras to announce his country's independence. He should have looked triumphant. Instead, he broke down. He stopped mid-sentence, dabbed his eyes, and needed almost 30 seconds to compose himself before he could keep talking. This wasn't the birth of a nation everyone dreamed of. It was a divorce nobody wanted. To understand why he was crying, you have to see what Singapore actually was in 1965. A tiny island, smaller than New York City, with almost no farmland and zero natural resources. A third of the population lived in slums or squatted illegally. Unemployment was near 14%. Half the adults couldn't read. There was no army to speak of. And the one resource every country needs to survive, fresh water, Singapore didn't have enough of. It had to buy it from Malaysia, the country that had just kicked it out. Most economists at the time didn't think Singapore would make it. Instead, the government did something almost nobody expected. It opened the doors wide to the outside world. In 1961, before independence even happened, Singapore had already created the Economic Development Board, a single agency with one job: convince foreign companies to build factories in Singapore. They reclaimed a mosquito-infested swamp called Jurong and turned it into an industrial park. Then flew to the United States to personally recruit electronics and semiconductor companies to set up shop there. At the same time, the government went after corruption. It created an anti-corruption agency with real teeth, paid civil servants competitive salaries so bribery wasn't worth the risk, and built a reputation as one of the most trustworthy places on Earth to do business. And it solved the housing crisis directly. The Housing Development Board built apartment blocks by the thousands, and by letting citizens use their own retirement savings to buy them, home ownership went from under a third of the population to over 90% in a generation. The results are almost hard to believe. In 1965, income per person in Singapore was around $500 a year. Today, it's nearly 100,000, a roughly 190-fold increase in 6 decades. The port that Singapore built around its only real natural asset, its location on one of the world's busiest shipping lanes, now connects to more than 600 ports in over 120 countries. A country with no resources became one of the richest nations in the history of the world. But the story isn't finished, because Singapore's original weakness never fully went away. Close to half of its water still comes through a pipeline from Malaysia, under an agreement that runs out in 2061. So Singapore has spent billions engineering its way out of that dependency, recycling wastewater into something called Nuator, and building desalination plants, racing to become fully self-sufficient before that contract runs dry. And the same tight control that built the economic miracle came with a trade-off: a government that still keeps a famously firm grip on politics, the press, and public life. Singapore didn't just get rich, it got rich by design, and it's still paying the price of that design today. Singapore had almost nothing in 1965. No resources, no water, no army, and a leader who cried on national television because he doubted his own country would survive. 60 years later, it's one of the richest places on Earth. Not because of what it had, because of what it built with almost nothing.